I like to put things together that don't necessarily belong together. I have my own jewelry making business now. It's called Second Era Metals. Second Era Metals because I use all metals: copper, aluminum, sterling, brass, stainless, anything I can get my hands on. Copper was the first era of metal that was discovered and used, and then they started alloying copper to make brass and everything else. So that's why we're second era. That metal is actually from the earth, that organic quality, and that it will change. You find it in an ore form and then process it so that you can use it. Alexander Calder. He's a sculptor and an engineer. I got to see a piece of his artwork in Chicago when I was 10. The piece was in front of the post office. It's still there. And he's the artist that created the mobile, which is was at that time it was a new idea for pieces to be kinetic and to move. I was a welder. I worked for Bethlehem Steel and P&H Crane and Kaiser Permanente, and then Alaska Railroad when I moved up to Alaska. And riveting is an old type of construction, rather than now it's mostly all welding, unless it's airplanes and very lightweight pieces of equipment are still riveted. But most metals now are welded. It's just faster and more efficient. I worked in San Francisco in the shipyards in the 70s. It's a Rosie the Riveter magnet, and that was me. I went there in 76 to work for Bethlehem Steel, and there was 6 women that had been there since World War II. And all the men left and went to the war, and they hired women, anybody. I say women, anybody, because that's how they felt about women, basically. They wanted men, but they had to hire women because the men were gone. And the women actually did an amazing, amazing job. And the 6 that I met in 76, of course, that was 30 years after the war, and they were still welding and getting ready to retire because they were then in their 60s. Actually met a lady that had been in the war. She was 100 years old, and she was a Rosie the Riveter. She said one thing that I thought was really interesting. She said, welding is not that hard. Don't let anybody tell you welding's hard. And women are better at it than men. It's about dexterity. Women are so much more, we use our hands so much more, cooking, sewing, making things. So you're a natural when it comes to like the TIG welding and the gas welding. I never expected to be an art teacher. When I got the job here, I loved, that was my best job in my whole entire life, was my art teacher here. Honeysuckle is standing now in front of the museum, and I carved her with a chainsaw. She's about 8 foot tall. And she's red cedar, and I went out and harvested the tree myself. And it took me a long, long time to see the value of art. I was raised German, very industrial, productivity. I think when I did honeysuckle, when I carved honeysuckle, was the first time I built a shed up at the top of the driveway, and I had my chainsaw, and I would walk up the hill in the morning, my driveway hill, and I got to a point where I just gave it up. I just said, okay, honeysuckle, we're gonna carve today. And it's very odd when you're looking at a tree trunk it was 10 foot tall at the time, and you're trying to visualize in 3D this bear. And at some point, she just kind of took over, and I was no longer, I was conscious of what I was doing, but I think artists, that was one of the first moments in my life when I really felt grateful, because I realized that I had this, I had this kind of spirit, back to the spirit world, kind of feeling of this is kind of beyond me. It's a talent, and I'm going to follow it best I can. I find pieces of pipe that came out of an old boat. It's black, it's covered with who knows what. And just to clean it and sand it and polish it until it is something that I can work with. And I like the fact that it's all handmade. To me, it just gives it a lot more value. Yeah, it means a lot to me, and then it means a lot to the person that's wearing it. Yeah. I got this piece just recently from a thrift store, and it's sterling, and it's beautiful. I think it was $1, but my plan is to cut this edge, the scalloped edge, and that'll be a piece in the earring. And I also use a lot of antlers, deer and moose antler, and that's dependent. I can talk to people about, if you want to bring me an antler, I'll use that in a pair of earrings that something you shot, or I have pieces that are strictly Yukon moose, because that's where we go to hunt moose, and it gives it a lot different, it's a story then of where that piece came from. I use what's called cold connection. It's riveting, and the riveting for two reasons. I'm just really intrigued with fastening. I love fasteners, like anything, hinges. I like to put things together that don't necessarily belong together. And in art, that would be called contrast or different textures. So that's kind of where I got interested in the copper, and the pieces I have here, I use old sterling platters that I cut up that are basically cast away. I mean, they were gorgeous, beautifully made years and years ago, and people are not necessarily interested in that type of artwork anymore. So I can find them at a thrift store for $3 or $4, big piece. And oddly enough, I realized they're molded out of copper or brass, and then they're sterling plated or silver plated. So when you sand them, the copper shows through, which I really like that concept. I get pieces of old jewelry that people have. Maybe they've lost an earring and they want a pair, they want another piece that I make, and the jewelry is very special to them. And that's kind of my concept of spiritual, when you're connecting with the person that you're making something especially for. I want to keep it local. I do the markets downtown on Saturdays, and I have my work in Brenda Schwartz Yeager's gallery that's right at the Stikine restaurant. And so the ships come in, the cruise ships come in, and they go into the shop, and I've done really well there. My husband letting me go work up in my shop. He wants me to make him dinner instead. I like the struggles. I like the challenge of figuring out what things will work and what won't. My best advice is to absolutely go for it, but keep in mind you have to be patient. So you have school, you have sports, you have your family, you have all of these other things that you're involved in and that you care about, and your passion is just one little piece of it. In the long run, if it stays your passion, you will eventually get to the place where it's a workable material for you. It may not be your number one specific job. Some people call it a hobby when it's not your main job.